Okay, now our component, or this part of the component, is now finished and it's ready. What we want to do next is we want, if we click on the details button, we want to open a site sheet, and the site sheet will contain A, the details of the selected identity, and B, we want also to have a page which shows the org structure for that person. Yeah. And we will use a couple of predefined and reusable components. And by the way, there will be other sessions where we will talk in general about components and introduce them, the reusable ones from us. But for now, it's out of scope. So the first thing is we have to create a new component, and we will do that in a new terminal. Let me open a new terminal and go to the correct folder. And we will call our new component sample identity details. And looking at the ng generate commands, what we can see here, we will use the sample identity folder and module, which is this guy here. Then the next piece is the name of the component, sample identity details. Then we say, okay, please add it to the QER library. We want to use SCSS, we want to export. So make the component publicly available. And then for the template, we are using our CCC prefix. And skip test, this is about unit tests. We don't need unit tests right now. So as you can see, the compiler is unhappy. Why? Because we have to add the newly created component to the public API file. And the public API file is like an interface. So if you want to use it and to export stuff, you have also to add it not only into the module file of that component, so the sample identity module, but you also have to add it to this section here. So let's do that. And now the compiler should be happy. Now the compiler who is watching QER is happy, but we have to issue the ng-serve command, so the npm run start portal command once again. The application is compiled, we don't have errors, and looking into the sample identity module file again, what do we want to achieve? If we select an identity, like Mr. Herwig, for example, and press the details button, a new page should show up. And here we will use something called a site sheet. A site sheet is one component in our UI framework, so elemental UI. And let's start to code that. So let me go to VS Code. The first thing we have to do, we have to import the site sheet service. As I mentioned before, the site sheet service is part of Elemental, so we have to import that. Now, the second thing we have to do is to write an event handler for the button. So when I click the button, the event handler will be triggered, and then we will open the site sheet. So let me add the event handler here. A selected item, selected identity is of is of class portant person all, and we will talk about this stuff in another session, because this is about APIs and classes which are provided in those APIs. Right now we will simply import it, and what will happen now, what we are saying is, we are saying that the sitesheet service should open the sample, so the newly created component, this guy here. So we have to import that too. And to show you what will happen now, I will save this, and as we know, this newly created component is empty right now, but we will add a tab group, so a tab or two tabs, but I want to show you how it looks right now. So we have to compile this, and then we have to also go into the template. And now we will add the event handler to the button in our table, and the column is this guy here, as you can see. And we will add a click event handler which points to the newly created event handler in our component. It's this guy here. So now the event handlers are there. So let's have a look if the site sheet will show up. And yes, we can see it. Right now it's a little bit ugly because it only contains the boilerplate code, the component. And what we will do now is to add in this site sheet a tab group with two tabs, one showing the details and the other one will show the organizational structure for that identity. And these two components we will add now are reusable components. We will not go into details. We will do that in another session. So let me go back to VS Code. Perhaps before I do that, I mentioned our UI framework Elemental a couple of times. If you're curious and you want to know which components are there in Elemental. Okay, so this is for example the page for the site sheet in Elemental, and we can also put this link into the description. So if you're curious, you can go to the site and see what we are offering, which components do exist. Okay, but going back to our sample, now we will first add a tab group, and the tab group is also a component, but this time it's not from Elemental, but it's from Angular material. Okay, then let me open the template of the new component, and as you can see, it has only a message. Before we can add the tab group, we have first to import it in the module. So you can see now we have the tabs module, and later on we will also need the org chart component and something which is called CDRs. CDRs are column dependent references, and that's a system, a reusable component, which we also, like data tables and other components, we are using them more or less everywhere, and there will be a session about CDRs. Basically, CDRs are something like read-write or read-only editors, which automatically understands an object and the properties. So you don't have, if for example you have a form, you don't have to do that manually, but the CDR system will analyze that object and create a form for you. But again, this is a little bit out of scope. We will handle that in a different session. Okay, let me compile this again. The first thing we will do is to add, in the site sheet, we will add a tab group. Right now it's more or less empty. It has already 2 tabs, but the content of the tabs only contains text. Let me just save it, compile it, so we can see how it looks right now. Now, if I hit the details button, we can see that now we have 2 tabs, which again only contains the text. And now we will add in the org overview our component, and in the details tab we will also add the CDR component. It will be read only. So the next step is we have to provide the necessary data to the details component. Right now we are not doing that. And so when you select an identity, click on the details button, the event handler will open the site sheet, and then in the site sheet we will provide the necessary data. So let's do that. Going back to the identity component, this is our event handler, and now we will add the data. As you can see, we have already the input parameter identity, and this is exactly what we need. Now we have to grab this guy here and deliver it to the site sheet. Okay, now I added also a little bit more code because when we select the data and open the site sheet, there will be one call to the API server. So looking at the code, first of all, let me just import this class here. What we are doing is we want to show a busy indicator because it can take some time sometimes. Then we talk to the API server, and this is the call. What we are doing here, we are grabbing this identity and the UID, so the ID of that identity, and then we ask the API to give us the details about that person. And once we have the response, we hide the busy indicator again. And then we added also this line here. So now we are providing the response from the API server to the site sheet. Going back to the details component, let me open that. You can see that it's more or less empty. Now we have to add a couple of lines. Looking at the constructor, we have injected the data into the site sheet, and then we can grab it here. Yeah. Then we need something called the project configuration service. I will come to that in a minute. And we added a list of entity columns and the entity schema. What is that? To make it very brief, the entity columns are the columns we want to show in the details view. And again, the data we are getting, so the object portal person UID is a class from the API. And these are all so-called identities, and we will cover that in a different session. And entities contains columns. Think of columns like properties. So the columns are the properties of that object. And the entity schema here is some kind of a description, a metadata description in a very generic way of that object. So we are injecting the data from the site sheet. We need this configuration service, and on init event handler or lifecycle hook, we first grab from that configuration service the configuration for identities, yeah? and we say we want to have, and again we will address that in another session. We say we want to show a specific set of columns, because there can be different sets of columns. But in this case, we want to show the details, but which are visible for everybody. And then in this last column here, what we are doing, we are looking at the schema which describes that object, and then we are grabbing all columns we want to show, because this object can contain more than these columns. Now in the component TS file we have everything we need. What we have to do next is to go back to the template, add in these two tabs the org chart and the details components, and wire that up. Now, as you can see, in the first step will show the org chart, and this is again a component, a usable component. And what we do here, the org chart component needs the ID of that person, and we are doing exactly that. Yeah? So here is our identity, and then we get with this command we get the ID of that identity, and the next component is this IMX property viewer, which is again based on our CDR system. And the parameters are the columns that the detail page should show. Now let's go back to our browser and look again at the site sheet. And now you can see here the org chart. And when I go to the details, now we have the details of that identity. We want to change a little bit the layout. First of all, you can see that the tabs, that there's no padding, yeah, so it does not really look good. Second, when you scroll, the tabs are also not sticky, yeah. And to change that, we have to go into the style sheet file of that component. And what we are doing here, we are saying that the tab group, so the whole tabs component, should take 100% of the space. Then we are adding padding to the tabs, and we are also saying that the site sheet content itself, so everything which is inside the site sheet, should not scroll. What we want is that only the content of a tab is scrollable. So let me save this, and then we will see how it looks like after these changes. Now looking at our site sheet, first you can see that here on top, for example, there is a padding of 10 pixels. Yeah? And when I go to details, only the contents of the tab will scroll, and not the whole content of the site sheet. So that's all what I wanted to show you for now, and thanks for listening.